I was 23 years old the day I watched a kingdom crack in half, and the strange thing is, it didn't make a sound when it happened. People expect these things to be loud. They think a palace falling apart must come with shouting and slammed doors and breaking glass. But the moment I'm going to tell you about happened in near silence, in a narrow back corridor of Windermere Palace, in the soft gray light of a wet October morning. And the only reason I know about it at all is because I was carrying a tray of cold tea that nobody wanted, and I took the wrong turn. Let me start from the beginning, or near enough. My name doesn't matter much to this story, but you can call me Tessa. I came to Windermere when I was 19, hired on as what they called a junior household attendant, which is a fancy way of saying I did whatever the senior staff didn't feel like doing. I polished things. I carried things. I learned to walk through a room full of important people as if I were a piece of furniture that happened to move. That was the trick, they told me. Be useful and be invisible. The royals didn't want to see the hands that kept their world running. They only wanted the world to run. Windermere itself was the kind of place that swallowed you. From the outside it looked like a great pale fortress, all stone and turrets and tall windows that caught the sun in the late afternoon and threw it back gold. Tourists used to gather at the iron gates every single day, rain or shine, pressing their faces to the bars and lifting their phones, hopping to catch a glimpse of someone famous walking past a window. They almost never did, but they came anyway. There's something about a palace that pulls at people. It promises them that somewhere, behind all that stone, fairy tales are still real. I want you to remember that, the fairy tale, because what I'm about to tell you is the opposite of one. The royal family of Haldane at the time I'm speaking of was not a happy one. I don't think most people outside the walls knew that. Inside, we all knew. You couldn't help knowing. You served their breakfast and you saw who wasn't speaking to whom. You changed their bed linens and you learned things you wished you hadn't. At the top sat King Reynold. He was an older man by then, in his late 60s, with a tired kindness about him and a habit of looking out windows for long stretches as if he were waiting for someone who was never going to come. He had been a good king, people said, a fair one, but he had grown soft and slow in the years since his first wife died, and softness in that house was a kind of weakness that other people learned to use. His first wife, the late Queen Eleonora, had died when her son was only a boy. I never knew her, of course. She was gone long before my time, but her portrait still hung in the long gallery and I used to stop in front of it sometimes when no one was around. She had a gentle face, sad eyes, the kind of woman you felt who would have noticed you if you dropped something and helped you pick it up. The staff who remembered her spoke of her in low, careful voices, the way people speak of a thing too precious to say out loud. That boy she left behind had grown into Crown Prince Aldous, the heir. He was 30 when this happened, tall and serious, with his mother's gentle eyes set into a face that had learned to stop showing what it felt. He had spent his whole life being watched, being measured, being told what a king ought to be, and somewhere along the way he had built a wall around himself so high that even the people who loved him struggled to climb it. He didn't smile much. He didn't joke. But I will tell you this. I never once saw him be cruel to a servant, and in that house, that made him rare. Prince Aldous had married a woman named Marielle, and she was, in my honest opinion, the best thing that ever walked through those gates. She had not been born royal. She came from an old but ordinary family out in the western counties, and she carried that ordinariness with her like a warmth. She remembered our names, all of them. She asked about our families. When my mother was sick, 2 winters before this, Princess Marielle stopped me in a hallway and asked after her, and listened to the whole answer, and I have never forgotten it. You don't forget being seen. And then there were the children. Aldous and Marielle had 2, a boy, Prince Theo, who was 9, all elbows and questions and a fierce love for the palace dogs, and a girl, Princess Elowen, 7 years old. I have to stop a moment, even now, when I get to her. Elowen was the kind of child that a hard old building like Windermere did not deserve. She had this great cloud of dark curls that no nanny in the kingdom could ever fully tame, and a gap where she just lost a front tooth, and a laugh that you could hear 2 corridors away. She wasn't a quiet, perfect little princess. She ran. She got mud on her dresses. She hid behind curtains and jumped out to frighten the footmen, who all pretended, every single time, to be terribly frightened. She used to sneak down to the kitchens to help, which mostly meant eating raw cake batter off a spoon and getting it on her nose. The cook adored her. We all did. She was the brightness in that whole gray building. When she went past, the place felt warmer for a minute. So now you know the family that mattered. The king who was fatting, the prince with the wall around his heart, the kind princess, the wild, laughing boy, and the little girl with the gap in her teeth. I've left one person out. I left her out on purpose, because that is exactly how she would have wanted it, to come last after everyone else, so that her arrival would feel like the most important thing in the room. Queen Sabine. King Reynold had married her 4 years before. She was his second wife, a good deal younger than he was, and she had come into the palace like a cold front rolling in off the sea. I'll try to be fair about her, even now, even after everything. People are complicated, I know that, but I have to tell you the truth as I saw it, and the truth is that from the very first day, Queen Sabine made the air in a room change when she entered it. She was beautiful, I'll grant her that. Tall, elegant, always perfectly dressed, with pale gold hair pinned up so tightly it looked like it might hurt. She had a way of smiling that never reached her eyes. When she was pleased with you, you felt like you'd won something. When she wasn't, you felt the temperature drop 10 degrees and you couldn't always say why. She had wanted to be loved, I think. That's the sad part. She had married into the most famous family in the kingdom, and she had wanted the whole world to adore her the way it had once adored the late Queen Eleonora. But the world doesn't work that way. You can't order love. And the harder Sabine tried to be loved, the more it slipped through her fingers, and the more it slipped, the colder and sharper she became. She and the late Queen's portrait did not get along. I mean that almost literally. I once saw Sabine stop in front of Eleonora's portrait in the long gallery and stare at it for almost a full minute with an expression I couldn't read. Then she turned and told a footman that the gallery was poorly lit and ought to be reconsidered. 3 weeks later, Eleonora's portrait was moved to a smaller, darker room on the second floor, where almost no one ever went. The official reason was conservation. Everyone knew the real one. But it was the children where things truly went wrong. Theo, the boy, she mostly ignored. He was a prince, the future, and you didn't ignore the future, so she was correct with him. Cool, but correct. He didn't like her, and she didn't pretend to like him, and they stayed out of each other's way. Eloan was different. I don't fully understand it, even now. Maybe it was because Eloan was so loved, so easily and naturally loved, the way Sabine had always wanted to be and never quite managed. Maybe it was because Eloan looked a little like the portraits of the late Queen as a girl, the same dark curls. Maybe it was simpler and uglier than any of that. Maybe some people just can't stand the sight of a happy child. Whatever the reason, Queen Sabine could not be in a room with that little girl without the temperature dropping. She corrected her constantly. Sit up. Don't run. Stop that noise. A princess does not laugh like a kitchen girl. If Eloan spilled something, Sabine's voice would go thin and flat and quiet, which was so much worse than shouting. The child learned to go still when Sabine entered a room. I watched it happen over the years. Watched the brightest little girl in the kingdom learn to make herself smaller. Watched the laugh die in her throat before it could get out. Watched her dark eyes go careful and watchful in a way no 7-year-old's eyes should ever be. Her parents didn't see the worst of it. That's important. Sabine was clever. She was never cruel where the prince or princess could see. She saved it for the corridors, the nursery, the quiet moments. And the staff, well, the staff saw plenty, but the staff didn't speak. You didn't in that house. You had your position and you had your family to feed, and you knew exactly what happened to servants who carried tales about the queen. So we kept our heads down and we told ourselves it wasn't our place. And every one of us who did that has to live with it because it was our place. It's always our place, when a child is being hurt. We just didn't have the courage to know it yet. Now, the morning it happened. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember because Tuesday was the day the upstairs sitting rooms got their full clean, and I'd been up since before dawn helping with that. The weather had turned. There was a steady cold rain coming down over the gardens, the kind that doesn't fall so much as hang in the air, and the whole palace had gone dim and quiet with it. The tourists at the gate had thinned to a few stubborn souls under umbrellas. The light through the tall windows was the color of dishwater. The king had gone hunting 2 days before, out at the country estate, and he'd taken Prince Aldous and a party of others with him. So the palace was lighter than usual. Princess Marielle had taken Theo to some engagement in the city. That left Aloan at home with her nanny, and it left Queen Sabine more or less running of the household, which she enjoyed far too much. I'd been sent to clear away a tea service from the Queen's morning room, cold tea, untouched, which was typical. She liked things brought and then ignored them to prove she could. I had the tray in both hands and I was heading for the back stairs, the servant's route, when I heard it. A sound. I want to be careful here, because I've gone over this moment so many times in my own head that I'm half afraid I've polished it smooth, the way you do with memories. But I'll tell you what I heard, as plain as I can. I heard a child cry out, just once, short, sharp, the kind of cry that isn't a tantrum. Every adult knows the difference, the kind that comes out of you before you can stop it because something has just happened to your body that you didn't choose. It came from the East Nursery corridor. I should have kept walking. That's the truth. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing every year in that house had trained into me, was to keep my head down and carry my tray to the back stairs and let whatever was happening up there be someone else's problem. The corridor I'd been told to use went left. I went right. I don't know why. I'd like to tell you it was courage. It wasn't, not really. It was just that the sound had hooks in it and they caught me, and my feet turned toward it before my brain had a vote. I came around the corner into the East Nursery corridor with the tray still in my hands and the cold teacups still rattling faintly against each other, and I stopped. And I want you to understand, I'll tell you exactly what I saw in the next part. I'll tell you all of it. The thing in the corridor and the small gray eye of glass up in the corner of the ceiling that I didn't even notice in that moment, the one that changed everything. I'll tell you what happened when the king and the prince came home, and I'll tell you what Prince Aldous said in that quiet, flat voice of his that ended a queen. But for now, just hold this picture. A wet gray Tuesday, a near-empty palace, a girl with a gap in her teeth, and a young servant frozen in a doorway with a tray of cold tea, about to see the one thing she'd spent 4 years pretending not to know. That was the moment the fairy tale ended. I just didn't know yet that it was also the moment a different story began. The corridor was long and narrow, lined with old portraits and one tall window at the far end, and the gray rain light came through it and lay across the floor in a pale stripe. I remember the floor especially. Dark polished wood, so clean you could see the window reflected in it. And in the middle of that stripe of light stood Queen Sabine. She had her back half to me, so she didn't see me at first. She was standing very straight, the way she always did, in a pale gray dress that nearly matched the light, and her hands, I noticed her hands. One of them was still raised, just slightly, the fingers half curled. The way a hand is when it has just finished doing something and hasn't decided yet whether to be sorry. Below her on the floor sat Aloan. Not standing, sitting. The child had gone down onto the polished wood, one small hand pressed flat against her own cheek, and she was looking up at the queen with an expression I have never been able to forget. It wasn't crying, not really, not yet. It was worse than crying. It was a kind of stunned, frozen, betrayed astonishment. The look of a child who has just learned, all at once, in a single bright second of pain, that an adult who is supposed to keep her safe is the one who hurt her. Her dark curls had fallen over half her face. There was a doll on the floor a few feet away, dropped, one of its arms flung out. I understood it instantly. You don't need it explained. A child does not sit down on a hard floor with her hand to her face by accident. The geometry of it told the whole story without a single word. The raised hand, the angle of the little head, the red mark already starting to bloom across that small cheek like a stain spreading through cloth. The queen had struck her. I had known for years that Sabine was cold and sharp and cruel with words. I had told myself all that time that it was only that. Only words. Words were terrible, but words were not this. This was a grown woman's hand against a 7-year-old's face, hard enough to put her on the floor. I have replayed the next 2 seconds so many times. Sabine lowered her hand. She did it slowly, almost thoughtfully, smoothing it down the front of her dress as if she were brushing off crumbs. And she said something to the child. Her voice was very quiet and very flat, that thin voice that was so much worse than shouting, and I only caught the end of it. And you will not speak of this. Do you understand me? Stop that noise. A princess does not make that noise. Aloan didn't make a sound. She'd learned, you see. She'd learned not to. And that somehow was the part that broke something open in my chest. Not the slap itself, terrible as it was. It was the silence after it. The way that little girl swallowed her own pain because she'd been trained to, because crying made it worse, because the safest thing in her whole world had become going quiet and small and waiting for the cold to pass. I must have moved. I must have made some sound because the teacups rattled and Sabine turned. Our eyes met across that long gray corridor. I want to describe her face in that moment, but I'm not sure I can do it justice. There was a flicker, just a flicker of something like fear, of being caught. And then it was gone, swallowed up by something far more frightening, which was nothing at all. Her face simply closed like a door, and she looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on the carpet, like I was a problem to be managed. You, she said, take that tray to the kitchens. The princess has had a fall, clumsy girl, nothing more. A pause. Her pale eyes went very flat. I trust we understand each other. It was a threat. There was no mistaking it, nothing more. We understand each other. I knew exactly what it meant. It meant, forget what you saw or it'll be your position, your reference, your whole future gone, and who's going to believe a servant over a queen? And here is the part I'm least proud of in this whole story. I said, yes, your majesty. I said it. I lowered my eyes and I said yes, and I turned and I carried my tray of cold tea down the back stairs with my hands shaking so badly the cups chattered the whole way. I left that little girl on the floor. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I told myself the same thing every coward tells themselves, that it wasn't my place, that no one would believe me, that I had my own family to think of. I got down to the kitchens and I set the tray down and I had to grip the edge of the table because my legs had gone strange. The cook, old Mrs. Halloway, took one look at me and asked what was wrong, and I couldn't say it. I just shook my head. She put a hand on my shoulder. I think she knew it was something. She didn't push. I spent the next 2 days in a kind of sick fog. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little hand pressed to that little cheek, and that betrayed, astonished look in Sabine's slow, thoughtful hand smoothing down her dress. I went about my work like a ghost. I told myself it was over. I told myself maybe it would never happen again. I told myself 100 soft, useless lies. But here is the thing about Windmere Palace, the thing that Queen Sabine, for all her cleverness, had forgotten. There was an eye in that corridor. 3 years before, after some incident with a stolen necklace, the head of household security had quietly fitted small cameras into a handful of the palace's interior corridors. Not the grand rooms, that would have been an outrage to royal privacy, but the back ways, the service corridors, the places where things went missing and no one would admit to being. The East Nursery corridor was one of them, because it connected to a stairway the staff used, and there had been a worry once about who came and went near the children. I didn't know about the camera. Almost no one did. It was just a small gray lens up in the corner where the wall met the ceiling, the kind of thing your eye slides right past. Sabine had forgotten it, or never knew. Or, and I think this is closest to the truth, she had grown so certain after 4 years of getting away with everything that no one would ever dare hold her to account, that it simply never occurred to her that anything could. But the eye saw. It saw the whole thing, the raised hand, the blow, the child going down, the doll dropping, the queen smoothing her dress, all of it in clear, cold, silent footage with the date and the time stamped in the corner. And on the third day, the king came home. I learned the rest of this in pieces, partly from what I saw myself, partly from what the other staff whispered for weeks afterward, partly from old Mrs. Halloway, who somehow always knew everything. So forgive me if I stitch it together, but I'd swear to all of it. It wasn't the king who found it, it was Prince Aldous. What happened was this. Eloan's nanny, a decent woman named Bate, who genuinely loved the child, had noticed the mark on Eloan's cheek the evening it happened. Sabine's story was that the princess had fallen and struck her face on a table. But Bate had raised 3 children of her own, and she knew, the way mothers know, that the mark was wrong. It was the wrong shape and the wrong place for a fall. A child who trips puts out her hands. A child who is struck does not. Bate didn't accuse anyone. She was as frightened as I was. But she did one small brave thing, the thing I hadn't had the courage to do. When Prince Aldous returned from the hunt and came to the nursery to see his children, which he always did first thing before anything else, Bate quietly asked if she might have a private word. And she told him she was worried about how Eloan had hurt her face, that the explanation didn't sit right with her, that she felt he ought to know. She didn't say Sabine, she didn't dare. She just said, "Something is wrong and I'm afraid for the child, and I'm telling you because I don't know what else to do." That was enough. That was all it took. Because Prince Aldous, for all his coldness, for all the wall around his heart, loved his children with a fierceness that nothing in that palace had ever managed to freeze. And he was not a fool. He went to his daughter. He sat down on the floor of the nursery, a crown prince in his good clothes on the floor, so that he was at her level, eye to eye. And he asked her, very gently, what had happened to her face. Eloan wouldn't say. Of course she wouldn't. She'd been told not to by the most frightening person in her world, and she was 7, and she was terrified. But Aldous knew his daughter. He knew the difference between a child hiding a small naughty thing and a child hiding a wound. And he saw the fear in her, and the fear told him more than any words could have. He didn't push her. He just held her, I'm told, for a long time, and told her she had done nothing wrong, and that she was safe, and that he would never, ever let anyone hurt her. And then he stood up, and his face had changed. The footman who was outside the nursery door said he had never seen the prince look like that. Not angry, exactly. Anger is hot. This was cold. This was the cold of a man who has just understood something and is now going to do something about it, and nothing in the world is going to stop him. He went straight to the head of household security, and he asked one question. "The corridors near the nursery, are they watched?" And the man, going pale, said yes, they were. I can only imagine what it was like in that small office, the 2 of them watching the footage on a screen. The clear gray image, the long corridor, the little girl with her doll, the pale figure of the queen, the raised hand, the blow. I'm told Prince Aldous watched it once, all the way through, in complete silence. And then he asked to watch it again. And he watched it again. And then he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, and the head of security said he would remember the look on the prince's face for the rest of his life. By then it was evening. The rain had stopped. The palace had that hush it got after dark, when the great rooms emptied and the lamps came on. And word began to move through the building the way it always did, not in announcements, but in glances, in footsteps moving faster than usual, in the particular quality of silence that means something is about to happen and everyone can feel it. I was in a downstairs passage, carrying linens, when I saw the prince go past. He was walking fast, his jaw set, his eyes fixed straight ahead, and a footman and the head of security were half jogging to keep up with him. He was heading for the Queen's apartments. I put down my linens. I don't know why. I think part of me had been waiting 3 days for the sky to fall, and I could feel in my bones that it was about to. I'll tell you what happened in those apartments in the last part. What was said, what the king did, and the words Prince Aldous spoke to Queen Sabine that ran through that palace like a crack through ice and have never, to this day, been forgotten by anyone who heard them. But I'll leave you here, for now, with one thing. For 4 years, everyone in that palace had been afraid of Queen Sabine. The staff, the children, even in his quiet, fatting way, the king himself. She had built her whole power on that fear, on the certainty that no one would ever dare. She had forgotten that fear runs out the moment someone stops being afraid. And a father who has just watched a stranger strike his child is not afraid of anything in this world. The doors to the queen's apartments were tall and white and trimmed in gold, and they were standing open when I crept close enough to see, because I did creep close. I'm not ashamed to say it now. Half the household did. We hung back in the shadows of that long hallway, a dozen of us, footmen and maids and the under-butler, all of us pretending to be busy with nothing, all of us watching. Queen Sabine was inside by the cold fireplace. She'd been dressing for dinner, I think. She was in something pale and silver, and her gold hair was half-pinned. When Prince Aldous walked in with the head of security behind him, she turned, and for just a second, just one, I saw her try the old trick. The cool smile, the lifted chin, the voice like thin ice. "Aldous, you might knock. Whatever can be the matter that—" "Don't." That was all he said, one word, quiet, but it cut her off cleaner than a shout ever could. He didn't raise his voice the entire time. That was the thing that everyone who was there remembers most. He never once raised his voice. He spoke in that flat, low, even tone, and somehow it filled the whole room and spilled out into the hallway where we were all standing, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever heard, because there was nothing left in it to argue with. He had a tablet in his hand. He set it down on the table between them, and he touched the screen, and I couldn't see it from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was playing. The long gray corridor, the doll, the little girl, the raised hand. I watched Sabine's face as she looked down at it. I watched the color go out of it. I watched the cool smile die and not come back. "That's not," she started. "She fell. The child is clumsy, she—" "I have watched this 4 times, Prince Aldous said, still quiet, still flat. "Do not tell me what I have seen with my own eyes. Do not stand in front of me and lie about my daughter while I am looking at the proof of what you did to her." "Silence." "She is 7 years old," he said. "She is 7. And his voice did something then, just for a word or two. It didn't rise, it tightened, like a wire pulled taut. And I think that was the closest that wall around his heart ever came to breaking in front of another living soul. "She has a mark on her face. She wouldn't tell me how it got there. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you have done to her? That a child would rather hide a wound than name the person who gave it to her. You made my daughter afraid to ask for help." Sabine had drawn herself up very straight. She was clever to the last, I'll give her that. She tried a different door. "I am the queen," she said. "You forget yourself, your father." "My father is on his way." The room went still. "I have already shown him," Aldous said. "He has seen it too." And that was the moment, I think, that Queen Sabine finally understood that there was no door left to try. Because the king, the soft, tired, fatting king, who had let her have her way in everything for 4 years because it was easier than fighting, even he could not defend this. No one could. The eye in the corridor had seen, and what it had seen could not be unseen, and there was no version of the truth left that she could shape with her thin, cold voice. She sat down. I remember that. The Queen of Haldane sat down in a chair by her cold fireplace slowly, like something inside her had given out. It was then that the king arrived. He came down the hallway, and we all pressed back against the walls and bowed our heads, and he passed us without a glance. He didn't see us at all, I don't think. His face was gray. He looked, somehow, even older than he was. He went into the apartments and the doors stayed open, and we heard him say only one thing to her, in a voice thick with something I think was grief as much as anger. "Is it true?" And Sabine said nothing, and her nothing was the loudest answer in the world. I won't pretend I heard every word of what came after. There was a long, low conversation between the king and his son that we couldn't fully make out, the kind of conversation that decides things. But I heard the end of it. I heard Prince Aldous, and so did everyone in that hallway, and so, I think, did everyone in that whole wing of the palace, and his words have been repeated in the servants' hall 1,000 times since. He turned to Queen Sabine and he said, "You will leave this house tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. You will not say goodbye to my children because you have lost the right to be anywhere near them. Your things will be sent on. You will never again sleep under the same roof as that little girl as long as I draw breath, and one day this will be my kingdom, and on that day you will not be welcome in any corner of it." A pause. You raised your hand to a child. There is no crown in the world that makes that anything other than what it is. And then he said the line, the one nobody has forgotten. You wanted so badly to be loved by this family. You never understood that love was the one thing here you could never take. You could only have been given it, and you spent it all, every bit of it, on a 7-year-old's cheek. Nobody spoke. The king looked at the floor, and Queen Sabine, who had ruled that palace by fear for 4 years, sat very still in her chair, and her face had finally completely closed, not into coldness this time, but into something smaller, something defeated, something almost human, right at the end when it was far too late to matter. She left that night. It was all done very quietly, the way these things are. A car came round to a side entrance well after dark. There was no announcement, no scandal in the morning papers. The family saw to that the way old families do. The official story, the one the kingdom was given weeks later, was that the king and queen had decided to live separately and that Her Majesty would be retiring from public life. Polite words, bloodless words, the kind that hide everything. But inside those walls we knew, we always knew. I'd like to tell you the rest worked out the way it should. Elowen got better, slowly. Children are more breakable and more unbreakable than we ever give them credit for. The mark on her cheek faded in a week, but the other thing, the flinch, the watchfulness, the way she'd learned to go small and silent, that took much longer. There were months where she still went quiet when anyone moved too fast near her. But she had her father, who never again let a day pass without telling her she was safe. She had her mother, Marielle, who took her out of Windmere for a long while to the western country house, where there was nothing but fields and dogs and quiet, and let her be loud again. Let her be a child again. And little by little, the laugh came back. I heard it myself, the first time, maybe 4 months later, that great unguarded laugh ringing down a corridor, and I had to stop and stand very still and put my hand against the wall, because I'd been so afraid that we'd lost it for good. The king never quite recovered. He grew quieter and grayer and faded faster after that, as if the truth about Sabine had taken the last of something from him. He died peacefully a few years on, and Prince Aldous became King Aldous, and from everything I saw and everything I've heard since, he is a good one, fair and serious and absolutely, ferociously protective of children, all children in his kingdom. People wonder where that comes from. The ones of us who were there don't have to wonder. As for me, I told you I wasn't proud of the part where I said yes, Your Majesty, and carried my tray down the stairs and left that little girl on the floor. I'm still not. It's the thing I'd give a great deal to go back and change. I think about it more than I think about almost anything else in my life. But a year after it all happened, I did something. I asked, through Bate the nanny, for a private moment with Prince Aldous, which was an enormous thing for a junior servant to do, and I was shaking the whole time. And I told him the truth, that I'd been in the corridor that morning, that I'd seen it, that I'd been too afraid to speak, and that I'd been sorry every single day since. I expected to lose my position. I was ready to. He listened to the whole thing without a word, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something I've kept with me ever since. He said, You were afraid because she taught everyone in this house to be afraid. That was her weapon. You're not the one who should carry the shame of it." And then he said, "But you came and told me the truth when you didn't have to and when it could have cost you everything. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing." I kept my position. I worked at Windmere for many more years. And I watched that little girl grow up tall and bright and unafraid, with that great cloud of dark curls and a laugh you could hear 2 corridors away. And every time I heard it, I thought the same thing. A palace is just stone. A crown is just gold. They don't make a person good and they don't make a person safe. The only thing that ever kept that child safe was that, in the end, the people who loved her stopped being afraid, and one quiet, gray, ordinary morning, and I in a corridor saw the truth, and the truth was stronger than a queen. That's the whole story. That's everything I know. I just wanted someone to finally hear it told the way it really was.